This video is a continuation for AP Environmental Science Chapter 3, so this is part 2 of the video. This is looking at Section 3, which is now focusing on energy in ecosystems. So what happens with that energy? How is it moving? How is it flowing through an ecosystem? So first part is it's going to go back and talk about food chains versus food webs. So again, this should hopefully be reviewed from biology. Remember that food chains are single linear, meaning straight line feeding relationships, and it's only showing a food chain is important because it shows us relationships or feeding relationships, but remember that a majority of things are going to eat more than one thing. So there's not a lot of things out there that are only going to eat one specific thing. So food chains give us a picture, but it's not the total picture. So food webs, on the other hand, food webs are going to be a lot more complex, and that's where we're looking at a bunch of interconnected food chains in an ecosystem. So it's all of the potential feeding relationships in that ecosystem. So make sure you understand the difference between them. When we talk about food chains and food webs, we also go over, again, and review trophic levels. But before I go over that, remember, looking at this diagram here, remember that all energy is flowing from the sun, and it goes from the sun to the producers, which are the first trophic level in the process of photosynthesis. There is some energy that's always going to be escaping throughout different processes as heat, which cannot be harnessed by organisms. It escapes into the environment. And then it goes from the first trophic level to the second trophic level, which are the primary consumers. So in this picture right here, the primary consumers are herbivores. Again, this is a single linear relationship because remember, there are other things that can also eat producers, such as omnivores. Then we've got our third trophic level, which are the secondary consumers. And again, secondary consumers are eating the primary consumers are eating the producers, and then we've got the fourth trophic level. Now, kind of jumping ahead, but looking over here, remember, we're really not going to see much past the fourth trophic level or the tertiary consumer. Occasionally, there might be a quaternary consumer, but the reason for that has to do with every time energy is passed from the producer to the primary consumer to the secondary to the tertiary, a lot of energy is escaping as heat. So for example, if we say 100% of the energy is here in the plants because the plants are producing the energy, then as the caterpillar eats the plants, only 10% of the energy that was available here is actually passing to the caterpillar. The other 90% is lost as heat. So when this bird eats the caterpillar, again, only 10% of the energy from the caterpillar passes to the bird. The other 90% is lost as heat, and so on and so forth. And that's something that we refer to over here as the 10% rule. So it's really important to understand the 10% rule. We also have to remember that pretty much that energy loss that happens is explained through the laws of thermodynamics, which we talked about or we visited in Chapter 2. And remember, the first law of thermodynamics is saying that energy cannot be destroyed. It can't be created from nothing. It can only change forms. And then the second law talked about when energy changes form, we're ending up with a lower quality type of energy. And so most of that is going to escape in the form of heat. Okay. All right. So I realized I jumped ahead, but just remember going back down here. So we went from food chains, which is that single linear relationship. It showed us very clearly these different trophic levels. So here's one trophic level, second trophic level, third, fourth. So food webs, on the other hand, show, you can see by all of these arrows, food webs are interconnecting. Okay, so for example, these fish here eat 3 different things. The penguins eat multiple things, which is why you see multiple arrows pointing to them. And then the other important thing with a food chain or a food web, remember, the arrows are not representing what eats what. The arrows are showing or tracing the flow of energy. So as energy passes from the plankton to the fish, then the energy passes from the fish to the penguin, from the penguin to the seal, from the seal to the killer whale. So the energy is flowing this direction. So that's really important to remember. What do the arrows represent? All right, the next part is looking at something called primary productivity. This is an important APES concept, so you need to make sure you understand it. It ties back to photosynthesis. And so primary productivity is defined as the rate at which solar energy is converted into organic compounds, such as glucose, by photosynthesis over time. And so it's usually divided into two parts. You've got gross primary productivity, which is the total amount of solar energy that's converted, versus net primary productivity, which is the total minus whatever energy was lost to cellular respiration. Okay, so it's just kind of looking at what's left over after we've lost some of it to cellular respiration. And so generally it's going to be measured in an energy unit, such as a kilocalorie, per unit area, such as a meter square, per a unit of time. So for example, kilocalorie per meter square per year. Okay, so primary productivity is just looking at the amount of energy that is being produced in that ecosystem. And then remember, it's divided into gross versus net. And we're going to do something that kind of looks at primary productivity in a mini lab in class. All right, the other thing that you need to know about with primary productivity is this diagram up here. So when we talk about terrestrial versus aquatic ecosystems, we need to be aware, or you need to be aware, that some of the most productive, meaning the areas that have the most photosynthesis happening, are places like swamps and marshes, tropical rainforests, and those are the two highest ones, and then temperate forests are the next one. But for the most part, for terrestrial or land-based ecosystems, it's swamps and marshes, and then tropical rainforests. And then for aquatic ecosystems, it's estuaries. So when we go back later on and we talk about pollution, we will look a lot about what the impacts of pollution are on estuaries, which means if we have issues with human activity, whether it's habitat destruction, it's pollution, that's affecting estuaries and affecting swamps and marshes, and we are cutting down tropical rainforests to make room for agricultural land, we are losing some of these areas that have this high level of primary productivity. And remember, what's the product of photosynthesis? Oxygen. What's needed for photosynthesis to occur? Carbon dioxide. So when we lose these areas, we have less CO2 being pulled out of the atmosphere and less oxygen being produced.